All right, I'm hanging out with Luke Butterworth and my friend Pete. How you guys doing?
Great. Good. How are you this morning, Mark?
I'm awesome. So, a lot of people who have listened to the podcast before will know that me and Pete have done a few podcasts together. So, owner of Meuwly's here in Edmonton, and we get to do some seminars and stuff like that in Jasper. So, we just finished one up yesterday at Epic here in Edmonton. How do you think that went, Pete? Was that good for you?
It was great. Yeah. So, this event that we've been doing, it's a food pairing and beer pairing event, but really it's like entertaining and telling stories about the industry, right? Talking a little bit about the beer industry, about Alberta's small batch food producers. And this is the first time we've done it for a paying audience for people that have bought a ticket to attend. So I'm really happy with it. I'm glad we gave that a try. It kind of pushed us to make it bigger and take the next step in this event that we're offering.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so Luke, you're the COO of Epic.
COO, that's right.
Yeah, and you guys have been working on this concept for a couple years now.
A couple of years, yeah. We kicked off the whole thought process behind this. The first couple of months, or maybe half of a year, where we were deciding what kind of form factor we were even going to build these things into, and Jennifer and I started in 2020, started that thought process. You're an entrepreneur, but you don't know what you're going to build yet.
So is this pre-COVID or like during COVID?
This was just pre-COVID, and as we had come up with the idea and started to execute, this was into January 2021. So
okay.
It was already
right
right in the center of the fun. We went, well, we'll have to find a way through.
Yeah.
And by the time we built it out, it was October 2021. And so that became our kickoff. We still had to deal with a lot of the kind of lingering issues that were there with COVID. But the idea behind what Epic is and what Epic was at the beginning was how to enable a lot of different vendors, a lot of different hospitality workers and chefs to show off their talents and their artistry, and a lot of that had started with my brother being an exec sous chef, and him and I, kind of always discussing and chatting about what he could build, what kind of restaurant, and not understanding why that was such a challenging thing to go through. Right?
So you weren't understanding that, or he wasn't understanding that?
Both of us.
Yeah.
When we sat down, we didn't get why it cost so much and why it was such a labor-intensive action. We learned, of course, throughout the process, that there's a lot that goes into the initial build-out, far and above what you initially expect. But that was the big thing that was really always hampering him from getting started. And so we wanted to have a platform for chefs and other great artists to really show off their talents. And what we've come around to now is this chef in residence concept.
Okay. So when it first started, what was the primary concept? Because I know I was in there last year, and what I remember is there was essentially 4 or 5 kitchens set up with different chefs. So what was the original idea behind that?
Yeah, we took a hard look at food halls all throughout the world. Very successful overseas. I mean, a lot of communities are kind of based around them. And so somebody comes in, builds out the infrastructure first, and then other smaller vendors are able to operate out of this space. And what it does is creates this community type of experience, but you have a lot of variety and everything in one place.
Right.
So you're not having to jump around to different restaurants, all in your one evening, and with like a group of friends. And so we really were able to achieve that. But what we found over time is that there's a lot of extra pieces that come into running a hospitality business.
Right.
And so the way that we'd originally envisioned it, we thought that we'd be able to give these extra insights. We'd be able to provide a little bit of coaching, kind of incubate. I think what's even better than that is giving people more or less, the chefs, an ability to create something great menus, focus on the artistry, but not necessarily have to build out the entire business.
Right.
And that was a clear delineation for us that we realized over the last year and a half is that not everyone's going to pick up on those skills right away. So over time, it'd be fantastic to work with them and to see them grow. But how can we have a relationship where they can show off their artistry, they can build their name up, but they're not having to run a completely different set of books.
Totally.
They don't have to raise money.
Like let a chef be a chef kind of thing, as opposed to, because when you start a restaurant, all of a sudden, any business, when you start off passionate about something, and then you look back after a couple of years, you're like, oh, the thing I was most passionate about is the thing I actually don't do anymore.
Totally.
Right?
I can acknowledge that that's a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned the concept or the model, I think it's chef in residence. Is that right? So is that something that you've evolved to then?
That's something that we've evolved to.
So what is that?
So a chef in residence it essentially allows us to work with many different chefs. They're getting a cut of the profits out of that particular bay or that particular concept that they've created. They help us with some of the mentorship, right? A lot like a chef in residence at a university or college, where they're able to have a direct relationship with a lot of the sous chefs, the way that the food is executed, and ensuring that it's a direct representation of their artistry, their creativity, some of their background. Like that's where we really tried to focus things, is if you have a particular style, let's show it off.
Right.
We're not trying to fit you inside of a box necessarily. Yeah. And what that does is it gives them the opportunity to continue doing other things. Like they don't have to be 40, 60 hours, whatever it happens to be in a kitchen, on the ground. And that's a pretty valuable interaction that we found. Is some of the best chefs, the most talented and creative, they gotta stay paid, and they have to have things going on all of the time. And so you're either pulling someone in as a full-time employee, or they're having to start a whole business from scratch. So we wanted to find something that was in between.
Right.
Gave them some flexibility, but at the same time, we'd be able to represent their artistry, and we could have an ongoing relationship that wasn't just transactional, right? Like paying for a menu or doing something like that right away. That's very traditional. Lots of people do that with great chefs, but we want to keep working with them, and that allows us to evolve each one of the concepts and hopefully to scale them a bit.
Right. So, and then Peter, you're working with them on a concept.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be developing a menu for Station Park. And I think what's really interesting about this, Luke, is when you launched as Just Cook and you were getting started, the focus was really on kind of early stage entrepreneurs and chefs who had this vision. You're trying to take down some of the barriers to opening their own brick and mortar, right? I have so much respect for that initiative. I know there were you worked hard at it. There were some ups and downs for sure. But I think what's really interesting about the new approach is it's still reducing barriers, but sort of for people who are a little further downstream in their career, maybe, maybe they've already run a restaurant, maybe they're already running a restaurant, their own brick and mortar, and it's a way for them to sort of lever up, launch something new through your infrastructure. And maybe it's a brand extension. Maybe they take it in a different style that they couldn't run in their own menu. Or, maybe they're not located in Edmonton, right? So it's a way for them to reach a new audience. And these are people who perhaps have already done a brick and mortar restaurant or have multiple, but they're still looking for that same opportunity, those reduced barriers. So I think it's really fascinating that that's sort of how it's evolved. For me, running Meuwly's, we've always wanted a way to reach the consumer where they're eating a meal. Not just to come in and buy our products and then take them home, but to be able to provide that hospitality, that dinner experience, that restaurant experience. But we don't necessarily want to run a restaurant at Meuwly's, right? So that's why it's such a perfect fit for me, and I'm really excited. So I'm curious how's the feedback been from the chef community? Like, what are these conversations like? Are people really, have you found that problem solution fit now? Are you feeling really good about it?
I'm feeling a lot better. Just over time, like the way that these things work, any type of product or creation, as Peter has said, it takes quite a bit of iteration, right? And we we put in that time. We iterated quite a bit on the concept, and now when I sit down and I have these conversations with different chefs in different areas of Alberta so far, it's really shifted to, you know, I've wanted to represent myself. I've wanted to create these things. I've wanted to focus on the artistry alone. And what other initiatives or opportunities have typically introduced is this added admin layer that strips away the enjoyment behind it. And so we thought if we can just focus on that component, if we can just focus on, like, you stay the artist, right? Just remain where you feel the most passionate, and that way we can focus on maybe the harder components, some of the more annoying admin pieces, but they're centralized. To be honest, we're fine with it. Like, we like that side of the business too. So we can stay kind of in our core competency. They can all stay in theirs, and then it becomes a conversation about, you know, what do we create? So then it just stays on sort of the bleeding edge of what's been interesting them lately, right? How to evolve something, how to take old recipes that they've been thinking about for a long time, or have kind of sat on the shelf for a period of 10 years, but they haven't been able to build it out. And we found that through some of these smaller events that we did, like the chef takeovers as well. Just give people a medium to show stuff off. And every chef that we've interacted with says, like, that's where their enjoyment, that's where their fulfillment, that's kind of the core to what they like about being a chef.
Right.
Eventually, when they get pulled into everything else, you know, it sort of dilutes that over time. And eventually, that's like, you know, 10th priority. Yeah. But if we can just stay there, that's fine. That's their number one. They don't really have secondary, third priorities. And we can stay on top of, all right, how does this thing expand? How do we involve more of them? And just keep a relationship going over time. Because I think that's what can be really unique about this, is that it can be, how do you evolve this representing thing? And it becomes a bit of a passive income earner for them, and great opportunity for us to show off a really high quality creation.
So because Peter, you mentioned that Epic, you guys are creating a second location. So you have one downtown Edmonton. Mm-hmm. You're building a second one on White Ave. When you look at these, do you want these to be, I don't know if there's a better term for it, like cookie cutter, or is each one going to be unique in their own way?
Yeah, I think they're always going to be unique in a number of ways. Is they'll probably always have a slight twist on what's being offered, but also some consistency in terms of what you can expect. You can expect, you know, great chef created menus and options that are there, that are authentic, that haven't been created by one person and then just sort of spaced or thrown around throughout each one of our locations. That the drinks and kind of fare and events and everything else are really based on some of the best chefs that we could get our hands on, that we could interact with, that we could form a relationship with. So that's what we want Epic to be over time, is anytime you're going to one of these locations, you are going to be experiencing really a collection of the best that we can.
Is it something that expands out beyond Edmonton? Is that the vision?
I would love to see that happen. Yeah, one step at a time, of course. But that's something that we've had kind of in the back of our heads, and not necessarily just being in the biggest markets either. Because in Canada, everyone assumes that there has to be like Toronto, has to be Vancouver, and these are the only spaces. But we've started in Edmonton. Calgary's there. There's Kelowna. There's these fantastic locations, and in each one there is a plethora of amazing culinary talent, hospitality talent that needs to be accessed and given more or less a platform.
Well, it's interesting because I remember years ago, my friend in Toronto was telling me that Hamilton had a really cool food scene, and a lot of it is, out of necessity. A lot of these chefs, when they looked at starting a restaurant in Toronto, it was just, cost prohibitive to do that, and so they're kind of pushed into these areas that they might not have thought of, and then all of a sudden you get these pockets of really cool chefs that are just kind of creating this culture. So I think I've been told Saskatoon has something like that too, where you have these really, really cool chefs. So yeah, it doesn't have to be the big centers where you have these types of things.
And I think that's been part of it over time. Is I've always heard big cities, great food, but I think the talent moves wherever.
Yeah.
so
and the talent doesn't deplete.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Like the talent is the most scalable thing.
Right.
So interestingly, with creatives and platforms for creatives, there have been so many out there for more for intangible work, right? For design and visual stuff. There's been all of these virtual platforms where creatives could just grow and sell, and it's much different to do that with a tangible, with a brick and mortar. So I think we're finally starting to see an understanding that if you provide, more and more spaces for the talent to grow into, they will keep generating ideas and concepts and menus. And these chefs, and to your point, in some of these communities, like say in Saskatoon or maybe some smaller urban centers, maybe the rent is a little bit cheaper,
right.
Maybe it's a little bit easier to get something going. So you'll see chefs who have 4 or 5 restaurants that they've been able to grow, and then maybe sometimes in the Vancouver or Toronto centers, like just paying your rent in that one is so tough. So there's never been a shortage of the culinary creativity. And I think you're going to see just an explosion of chefs reaching out saying, hey, I've always wanted to do this other concept. I've got this idea. It just doesn't fit with my current restaurant. How can I get started? So I'm super excited as word gets out across the country to see who comes in and who wants to try something, whether it's in Edmonton or they're encouraging you to come to their city and open up a food hall there.
Yeah, I love that.
And what I love about just, chefs in general, and you look at restaurants is, because I was asking about challenges that you've had to overcome, but that's something that I feel like the hospitality industry is so good at, is because you're consistently overcoming challenges. And so when people see new concepts come up, it's not always because people are creative and want to try it. It's often out of necessity, right? It's like, okay, what isn't working? And you have to be, continuously, open to new ideas and trying to just test them. And so the industry is just always evolving. So is that part of it? Is this kind of the evolution of the industry to some degree?
I think so. I've been seeing it in a few different areas of North America, especially. I think Europe has done a really good job of providing platforms, creating food halls, really developing these hubs and some of the infrastructure. I think we're starting to finally get it. In each city that we've been through, there's these kind of box parks, like container parks, similar to what Station Park is doing now, where the second location is. Where you start to get a collective of things happening, and I think that infrastructure provides a really important layer, and it takes a lot of different people coming in with, I think, a bit of a new perspective as well. Right?
And there's sort of strength in numbers with this too.
Absolutely.
Like how are you and your team seeing the community sort of develop within these groups of restaurateurs working together? Is that something that you're going to be, really trying to foster? Have you kind of looked at how that fits into the big vision?
Yeah. So as we go forward, what I'd like to see and what I'd like to attempt is really to get a lot of these different, let's call them chefs or vendors or however we want to term them, together, like host events, host mixers, like really try to make sure that we're bonding people together, because we have a very different relationship now, right? We're providing an opportunity rather than it being more of like a landlord leasee kind of relationship. I think that's where things kind of broke down in the first instance, is that became it. So it becomes confrontational in some ways.
Right.
When you both get onto the same side of the table, now we can have different conversations about like which mediums, what else could we introduce? Would there be other particular features that we should build in as time goes on to the physical, but then also even to this events application that we're building out? How to better represent or make you more available, or what else do you want to offer, and how?
Yeah.
I think there's a plethora there, but I think it'll really help develop out a set of entrepreneurs within the hospitality space that don't necessarily just go into a back of house right away as their one staple or source of income. And I've seen a bunch of other platforms come up over time offering, chefs as a kind of contract position, and people are making more money off of that as well.
Yeah.
So it probably is a little bit late compared to where tech starts off with, when there's like this freelance community of people working from home and working abroad and everything else. But I think that is something that I've seen more of over the last 3 years. Is COVID did a bit of a dislodge and recentered a lot of people. They left hospitality, they saw other things, they saw how other people were working, and now they've tried to pursue that on their own as well. How can I still do what I love and what I'm talented at, but keep some of the flexibility, the 40-hour work week and everything else that a lot of other professions have been able to attain? And I that's where I see a lot of this kind of going, is if we're able to support a set of different contractors from a whole set of hospitality, the entire kind of scope of it, then we're providing an outlet where you can make money. You can run sort of your own small business, but we're just not, we don't have a landlord leasee kind of interaction. So if you want to do stuff here and somewhere else, you can, and that all becomes much more optional.
Well, and the one thing that it helps, I was thinking, is, if you're a passionate chef and you want to start a restaurant, the overhead costs, are crazy. Whereas this is, it kind of offsets that cost. Basically, more people are sharing that, as opposed to if each person has their own restaurant, they're all taking care of those costs themselves. One of the things that you mentioned was the working from home. So over COVID, it kind of, we were able to reimagine how we worked and where we worked, which is great sometimes and not great other times, because then it displaces where people are working. And so how is that a challenge in the industry just in general? Because, where it used to be, I don't give a shit if you're sick, get in here, everyone's got to be in the office, to now it's like, hey, if you're sick, stay at home or whatever, as long as you show your face once a week, who cares? How is that kind of new culture affected the industry? And that's just open to both of you guys.
Yeah, downtown's having a hard time.
Totally.
Right? anyone who works with downtown here in Edmonton in any capacity, I think we've all seen that. We've seen the challenge. I know the city's working really hard to address it. There's a lot of passionate people trying to tackle this, but there just aren't the number of diners downtown going for lunch that there used to be. And we're on 124th Street. We're on the edge of the city core, but we still feel it there too.
Yeah. It's changed the behavior of most people. Like it just did. Like how many weeks does it take to set kind of a new habit?
12.
Yeah, right.
84 days.
84 days.
Yeah, there you go.
But
and we're past that.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing that I always thought was interesting through COVID, was because people thought, okay, once we tell people they can go back to it, it's like flipping a switch. And it's like, well, no, but you've created new patterns in people's lives. And so you don't just go back to the way things were. You've created those patterns. And yeah, maybe sometimes people do and can go back, but it isn't an automatic, default. So
I think it's a brave new world.
And we're all trying to figure out how delivery fits into the restaurant model of the future. So with 5th Street downtown, how have you kind of seen the mix, and how do you think that'll compare to Station Park on White Ave?
We've seen probably about 20% is where our delivery mix hits. Maybe another 10, 2015 becomes kind of a pickup takeout. What I've been doing on our side is starting to kind of shift our view of it, and I started to see a lot of downtown businesses do the same, kind of in concert. And there are people that will come downtown, and you'll see it every time there's a hockey game, every time there's a concert. So it's not that those people won't go spend money, that they won't go out, that they're not doing these things. It's just that the impetus for it has completely shifted. So for them to go downtown from their house that happens to be, in the south, takes a different kind of lever, which will need to be based on events or something else that's calling you in, because it's no longer now based on proximity, that this person was in an office a block away, decided to go for lunch, and has traveled out and gone there. They're not in that office.
Right.
They're in the suburbs. So that has to be a little bit different. Maybe they're ordering, right, and you're getting delivery directly from. What I've been finding is even more interesting is like how can we provide that person still works for a company, that person still works for a business, they still do catering, they still do events, they still do business summits. But what a lot of businesses are trying to focus on right now is how to get your team together. How to evolve, the new way of like team camaraderie. Because if they have a similar problem, right? We're not meeting for lunch. We are not sitting down in the office next to the water cooler. So how do you get a group of people that are either across the country or just dispersed in any given city together? You now need to plan it.
And it needs to be special.
And it needs to be special and unique.
When you get people together in a room, you need to have a good reason for it. You need to ensure that they feel that it was worth the trip, worth the commute. And in the same way, when you tell someone to come downtown to spend money at your business, you need them to feel that was a great experience. So it's actually really timely. We've been meeting. I know you came out to a meeting with a bunch of local restaurateurs. Scott from the Butternut Tree has really kickstarted this. And one of the things we talked about at this meeting is for us as business owners in the core, we need to collaborate and tell our stories together so that if someone comes into my shop and they buy some charcuterie, that my team at the till is saying, hey, have you been to Duchess down the street? You're going to love it. We send that person to Duchess. Duchess sends that person for a beer across the intersection at Irrational Brewing. And, suddenly that consumers had 5 stops in the community that, let's face it, you can't do that in a 2-block radius in the suburbs. That's what's special about an urban 100%. Core. But we have to activate that. We have to have this kind of synergy. And when you stop and think about it, that's exactly what happens in a food hall, right? It's not just I'm going to go get my dinner at this French bistro concept. It's I can get that. My partner can get, something from the Asian menu across the hall, and then there's all these other things. So there's just this opportunity to do so much more. Yeah. And was that intentional? Is that just sort of is that inherent to the model, or is it just a byproduct?
No, I think it's pretty inherent to the model, what we wanted to achieve, what we wanted to get. And honestly, we've been trying to be quite collaborative from the start. Like that's how we've seen every other business work quite well. Doesn't matter if it's most of our experience was tech. But in the tech universe of things, you're typically not being ultra competitive against every other product. They're all selling to other small businesses, but you have a slightly different product and offering. You can get along and help sell one another, and I think that's a big thing that hospitality, since I've come in, doesn't always do.
Right.
It doesn't always
We have some room to improve. Okay.
Well, and
we do.
And Luke, you mentioned here in Edmonton, Happy Beer Street. And I think the beer industry has been a good model of that, where, the craft beer industry, where, they have intentionally propped each other up and said, hey, if you like, this type of beer, we make a great one, but so does, the person across the street. And I know so many examples of just authentic, stories of breweries helping. There was 2 breweries over COVID in Medicine Hat one had a canning line, the other did not have a canning line, and effectively they were screwed because they had no way of distributing their product because people weren't allowed to come into the brewery. And so this brewery with the canning line said, hey, come and use ours. And they could have just waited them out until they shut down and bought their equipment or whatever for pennies on the dollar. But they're like, no, like let's get your product out to market. And so there's so many authentic stories like that, and I think that that's where a lot of industries can learn and just be like, we're better if we just keep pumping each other's tires.
It creates density, liveliness, interaction. When you have a lot of different restaurants together, I don't think that they should really think about it as being competitive against one another, because you have variety. And so people are coming into that area and getting natural visibility to one another. They didn't come into your place, but they saw it.
Yeah.
So
well, and 124th is a perfect example of that. Like,
Yeah.
I went yesterday. I was at Northern Chicken to say hi to Matt, and Meuwly's is right there. And then you look across, and it's Three Vikings and Woodshed, and like you said, Irrational, and what's the bakery you mentioned?
Duchess.
The Duchess. Yeah. So I have to go there every time I'm in Edmonton to pick my daughter's stuff.
Yeah.
I could be here for a week as long as I bring back the macaroons. They're like, you're good. Yeah. But like you think about it, like you're sitting just at that intersection and all the cool shops that are there. It's very, very unique. And if you guys can prop each other up, then it's just like people come to 124th as a destination and not intending specifically to get all those things, but when you're there, it's just like, it's really, really cool.
I thought Happy Beer Street was kind of the interesting initiative, because it's one layer above everything else that exists there.
Yeah.
So you're seeing kind of this like community form, and it has a name.
Yeah.
and that's really interesting to brand it, to show it off. Like this is a collective of different groups. They're not all under the same ownership, but they're providing kind of one experience. And so you can go anywhere along this beer street. And that's always really cool, because you are advertising and marketing a whole area as one big collective experience, regardless. That I think is really interesting. I think there can be a lot more of that in hospitality in general. Like, there are business associations. Yeah, they come to the fold. They do a lot of terrific stuff. We've seen what they've been doing downtown and what they're doing with Old Strathcona. So love all of them. But there's always this like community aspect that also just kind of rises up. Like, as far as I know, Happy Beer Street is not a business association. It's just kind of natural.
Right.
And when things form that way, they have everyone's kind of best interests at heart, and it feels very authentic.
And then what's nice is, like you said, they're all different owners, and so they can attract people collectively, but then individually they get to have their own distinct vibe or whatever you want to say. So you go into each of those breweries, really the only thing that they have in common is that they all brew beer. But if you go into each of those tasting rooms, they're all different, and they're all kind of showcasing the people that created that brewery. And so there's just a really fun it's a really cool initiative.
They bring character out of it. And so what I'm hoping is, over time, what we're able to do with Epic is really show off kind of that character in each spot, and give
the chefs that forum to kind of share their story and share their 100%. Passion. I think that's cool.
The new spot has a chef's table, right? A demo kitchen.
Nice.
That we can use, and it's specifically for this reason. We thought, okay, there's 5 kind of standardized different menus that'll be there, each with a chef in residence. And then there's that 6th space. And within that space, it's really based on presentation. It's based on having people in and being able to show things off. So I think that is going to be a terrific forum. You have this massive space overlooking White Ave and Gateway and looking downtown. You've got lots of seating up there. So if we want to host events that are just around a particular person coming in, we can do that.
That's cool.
Yeah. And it plays to what we what we wanted to do. We don't want to switch out every bay,
Right.
every other week. There's a lot of logistics that come into that. So how can we have one particular bay that's just focused on new, different, educational, and it could just be for, a great bartender that's coming in and wants to show off and do a cocktail class. Fantastic. Or a terrific chef that happens to be doing a little bit of traveling and wants to stop in. They're going to run a night. It'll just be a pop-up. You happen to wander in and that's what you're getting, or it's a ticketed event.
Yeah.
But it becomes really easy for us to do at that point because everything's set up for the purpose. And so I think if that kind of community can always form in these spaces, then each one of these sites, sites for Epic, becomes kind of a venue for great food being shown off, a real platform for a couple of people to put their name up, and we're able to, sort of 10x the exposure, hopefully.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of pre-Epic, because you went to school for kinesiology.
Yeah.
You had a career in healthcare, AI, and robotics. And then you go into Epic. So technology to hospitality, it just seems like an
What a
interesting leap.
Yeah.
So why did you make that choice?
Well, I spent probably the last six-ish years directly working with different tech companies. So the first one came out of kinesiology, came out of that exposure to healthcare, what I'd seen in these clinics and kind of larger operations as well. So we got into telehealth before COVID and before there was a real impetus for people to change their behavior. But we're sort of always after that bleeding edge to a point.
Yeah.
That's maybe my blessing and curse all at the same time, is that's what really interests me. So when I wasn't seeing anything that resembled telehealth in Alberta or better parts of Canada, I thought this seems like a no-brainer. This is an obvious thing. You're able to share medical files with somebody that's remote. You're able to get treatment, whether you're in a rural community, wherever it happens to be. And so that became the common theme. And what I've noticed in these different areas is it's never really that you become an ultra specialist in each area, because entrepreneurs by their very nature are generalists. And in order to scale something later to get much, much bigger, specialists have to be brought in. But you are a generalist. You understand how to identify problems, how to come up with the solutions, how to build the team up, how to come up with the initial foundations, and then how to be very stubborn and persevere past a bunch of those initial stages where you fail to get product market fit, or you're just learning, because it's so iterative every single time. So that's kind of the common theme regardless of the industry that I've found, and that took me to my different interests. Like I loved working in this big manufacturing while I was in environmental health and safety. Loved and was very interested in the logistics of it. And so while I was there, that became my nerdy passion. Was this place is doing it's doing about 150,000 cars off the lot a week, I believe. It was astronomical in terms of its size and scale. You had 4,600 employees, and all the parts for these vehicles have to come in constantly. So you're running a whole fleet of trucks, a massive fleet of trucks, and they're doing these short haul trips from Syncreon, that's just nearby, that holds all their logistics, then Syncreon to another supplier that's another couple kilometers away. You have 10 to 20 different feeder manufacturers coming to Syncreon, then coming to the plant. And each one of these is probably 5 kilometers. That's where a lot of automation was being done and staying. So when we were evaluating what was happening in automation for vehicles, right, self-driving, everything else, people were going after full self-driving for a consumer vehicle. But the things that actually stayed and are operational right now is these kind of short haul automated routes.
Right.
And so that's what we got into. That's what I thought was like the most obvious. These are predefined, repeatable paths that don't introduce, new kind of black swan events.
Yeah,
and
pedestrians.
people throwing shopping carts and stuff in downtown. Like you just may not. The vehicle and the computing system has to deal with a billion different inputs. But if some of that is sort of predefined, then you're focused on safety and following the same path and repeating things rather than coming on a new situation and having to figure things out. And so that's what kind of got me into this robotics area, because I went through Next Canada, teamed up with these robotics founders, and we started building this autonomous retrofit for a Class 8 vehicle, a full-size semi-truck, to do these short routes.
Wow.
And that was really, it was very, very cool, very interesting. It deals with a plethora of different systems. Computer vision is sort of the main engine behind it, but then you're having to use LiDAR systems and vision systems and radar, and those are all like incredibly interesting, and you kind of never get to a point where it's fully done. There's always something new that you can introduce. And then from there, I was working on that group, working with that company, I got introduced to somebody here in Edmonton. Actually, they've grown a company that's become quite dominant in the logistics space, more so from a tech component and helping out big semi trucks and everything else. And a friend of theirs was starting another company in AI in LA, and so teamed up with them. similar kind of facets. Where can we focus again on that like problem set? And then finally, after that, Jennifer and I had been chatting about doing something in food in general to support. We thought there was a lot that really just hadn't been done, and we both pulled in a lot of information from my brother working in the industry for 10 years and just telling me how things operated, where there was some shortfalls, where he wanted to get started but what was kind of standing in the way. And then for Jennifer, it's been her whole family. So her whole family understood kind of this like small hospitality, seafood distribution, and we thought this could be really great. Like, how could we empower a group of people to do these things? And then that, then the hooks are in.
Yeah.
And the problem set becomes kind of your addiction. Is like, how do you solve this in a way that's going to make sense? Come up with your first assumptions. Go out, talk to every chef, culinary expert you possibly can. What are the biggest downfalls? Would this actually help? Would this not help? Where are we blind to obvious facts? Because inevitably that's always going to happen. And then you have to actually start.
Yeah.
And that becomes the hardest thing.
So one of the things, I'm probably butchering, but I think what you were saying, the quote was, "I really love the process of building, testing, and learning from my mistakes." So those three components, building, testing, and learning, is that kind of foundational to what you think an entrepreneur is?
Pretty much. I mean, the order might change up depending on like what stage you're at, but you're always, to me, you're always building something. You're creating it. It doesn't have to be physical right away, but you're coming up with those initial ideas, and then you're going to test those ideas by talking to a lot of different people, or pushing a product out, which is inevitably going to have you learn from all of those experiences, from people's feedback, from the failures of the product, to just naturally kind of to get attractiveness to other people, or to sell, or whatever it happens to be. And then you're doing those things on repeat, because you're having to, again, improve, build upon your initial assumptions, test those with a new group, and then you learn from the results of it.
Yeah.
And you never really stop doing that. But that's it's 3 different steps that you pretty much do in perpetuity. because you'll inevitably hit the next thing.
Yeah.
And you'll decide to build something else, or you're building something small within the company or large within the company that already exists. And that's the new feature. That's the new product. And you're going to have to test. You're then going to have to learn from your results. And if you do learn, you'll build again, and you'll probably have to change it.
Yeah. Does it feel the same in hospitality? Like,
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, Luke, what can we as an industry learn from tech, where things move quickly, tend to make a lot of money, tend to scale? There's challenges in every sector, but does it feel the same to sort of have this iterative process as a hospitality entrepreneur? Has it been challenging to bring those same philosophies and processes over, or what's that been like?
I think it can be learned from. What I found when I first got into any of these spaces was people were teaching you to do kind of like the business plan. Mm-hmm. So build up the whole company first, then execute. And when I've talked to a lot of different hospitality people over time, that still kind of seems to resonate. Build the entire company first on paper, then execute, then did it work or not, and maybe never return to the start.
Because it's too expensive. If that didn't work, it's just like, well,
Totally.
shit, you got to
That's it.
You got to rebuild the whole thing.
That's right. So I think there are some iterative processes there that can be introduced, right? Like if you've designed a whole menu, do you know if people like it?
So you need the lean canvas,
Yeah.
which is very much like a lean startup kind of tech tool. You need to adopt that into like a lean menu, which is kind of what we're going to try to do for Station Park, right? Is all these different chefs are going to put forward sort of their greatest hits and say, yeah, I think this dish will sort of represent a good feel for my concept, and let's test it, and let's see how people respond to that before, getting all the ingredients in for the whole menu and promoting it and marketing it and rolling it out, and then finding out that, oh yeah, maybe this isn't a priority for Edmonton. Maybe this style isn't going to resonate.
That's right. Because I think that's typically how things go.
Yeah.
You're sort of, and this is what everybody advises against over time, is just like build it and they will come, right? So if you do that and things work out, excellent.
Yeah.
You look like a hero.
You look like
but
a
you
hero,
got lucky.
exactly. You were a genius. Yeah, you're a genius. But there's always an element of luck in each one of these things. It's because you created something new, and you have no idea how the general public will respond to it. And so you can take all the necessary steps, but it may not hit perfectly.
Yeah.
Or what will happen with you, especially I think in hospitality, is over time the ground shifts. And so how do you build in a little bit of flexibility, at least, or maybe a lot, so that you can accommodate these massive swings and shifts? A lot of this stuff is very rigid.
Yeah.
In the way that it's built out, right? I created a menu, I dump a lot of money into the printout of everything. I only have one way of sort of operating. It's worked for a long time. When the ground starts to shift, they stay rooted. And so I think it's not easy to do because it is brick and mortar, but retailers do this really well all the time as they shift. Mm-hmm. Like they change their approach, they change their marketing. They're okay with their brand changing and adapting. And I think that's a big one for hospitality as well, is if people's behaviors change, well, yours has to as well. You have to accommodate the massive swings and learn from the assumptions. And so we do that quite a bit. Like we've undergone these changes. We've done all this stuff in under 2 years, because we'll see what works, see what doesn't. What works stays, and what doesn't, we start to rip it out. And what it eventually does is it starts to close things in.
Well, and what's cool about that is it allows you to have those like honest evaluations, because so many times people define mistakes as failures, and you don't want to admit when you've failed. But if you can kind of correct as you go, correct these little mistakes, or like you said, you present something to the public and it's not received the way that you thought it would be. It's like, okay, you can either blame the public and be like, well, that's just because they're stupid. Or you can be like, okay, maybe we're not communicating it properly. Maybe it's just a product that they're not interested in. But if you're tweaking as you go, but I think a lot of people are scared about, maybe becoming an entrepreneur or starting a business because they do equate making mistakes with failing. And I mean, ultimately, as an entrepreneur, you have to be willing to fail a lot.
A lot, yeah.
And you have to learn how to do it quickly and recognize when it's a failure versus something that just needs that little final push over the finish line.
Yeah.
What does that look like with the festival over the years? I'm kind of curious about that, Mark, because, like you've been in this industry 20 plus years and have built this just like juggernaut of a brand that every time the festival comes to town, like it's everywhere. We hear about it, the brand is so strong, the marketing's so strong, but I'm sure it wasn't, it wasn't an overnight success. Like, have you kind of developed the same iterative process that Luke's been talking about?
Yeah, we evaluated, after every festival, we look at what went right. One of the things that I have to get better at is looking at the things that go right, because I'm so trained to look at the things that are going wrong. I'm like, no, that flow didn't work and so I have to learn to just enjoy the process more and just enjoy being in the moment while I'm at the festivals, because I am always looking for the things that we can tweak and improve, because you always want the experience to be better, the next time around. And that's what I love about doing festivals is we always have an opportunity to get better. And, after festivals, inevitably, we look at, okay, what are our processes? What can we focus on this year to improve specifically? And sometimes, the other thing is communicating that to people in a way that you're not there. You're not saying, what you did was shitty and we're having to redo it. It's like we should always be looking at redoing everything to make the processes better, because as soon as the processes are better and more predictable, it makes the whole thing more enjoyable, because you're not running around like a madman constantly. So I really enjoy the process, but it has to come down to admitting that what I'm doing could be better, what my business partners are doing could be better, and then just really honestly asking, how does that look? I know this year we're implementing like a CRM, which is a lot of work, and I was like, I really don't want to do that, but ultimately it'll make what we do better.
It'll be so much more helpful. It's just tracking those things, right?
Totally.
Like, CRMs are terrific. I think there's probably a big opportunity to keep track of who you've done business with, how you're interacting with them all the time in hospitality, because you are very much like you are a people first business. Everything is based on interaction and relationships, and which businesses are coming back and catering from you or hosting at your spot. I mean, that's everything. So how do you keep in touch?
Yeah. And everybody can be guilty of thinking, and I'll say it sometimes, and people within our company will say it. It's like, well, that's just how we've always done it. That doesn't like that. I almost want to change just out of principle if I hear that. It's just like, because that is
God.
Yeah. And sometimes the way we've always done it can be the best way to do it, but it's always okay to question that.
It's always energy, and I think that's the hardest thing about the iterative process in general. is change. Change takes energy, plus it's always really uncomfortable. Like, even if something isn't working perfectly, it's working, and you don't have to put in more energy. Right? It's already sort of functioning. And so you feel comfortable. But the second that you want to change that, there's not only uncertainty, but there's energy that has to be put in, because of the uncertainty, it inevitably won't work perfectly the first time. So there's a little bit of heartache there. And then getting around to that point where it's now cleaned up is always this, whole roller coaster.
And as business leaders, we have to manage both sides of that change initiative, right? We need to kind of rally the team, get our company aligned and believing that it's necessary and willing to do the work. And then we need to convince our customers, our guests, our brand advocates that this is a good thing and that their experience will improve. And managing both of those at once can be very tough as well. 100%. But I'm really excited to see how you've rolled out some of these changes with Just Cook becoming Epic, with a new location. We did this event last night at your restaurant, and people were really excited to hear about the new location. So I think there's big moves happening, and it's going to have a huge impact in the local community.
I'm pumped. Like, and just bringing White Ave back up too. Like, they're within that development that's there. It's mixed use. So the whole, bottom floor are these terrific, small micro retailers that are going to be there. Podcast studio, which maybe you want to come out to.
Absolutely. Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
No, and I think just revitalizing. When I went to U of A, I lived right off White Ave, and it was the place, like, it was awesome. It was like my little bubble. People would say, "Hey, you want to go here?" I'm like, "No, I'm good in my." And so it's cool to see it being refreshed, because I think every area should be continuously trying to refresh.
Yeah, these guys have been good to work with. Belgians on 124 as well. They take on some really interesting older properties, revitalize them, and then turn them into a bit of a hub.
Yeah.
And mixed use is kind of what they've been after. And so there's always some interesting different groups within the same space. And I think that's a good model for this, just in general, like revitalizing communities, having this this kind of complementary offering. So when I go somewhere, if I want to grab a coffee, grab something just quick that's like a snack, something sweet, and then I'm out and I'm shopping and I'm wanting to buy something, and then it's it's already lunch or it's mid-afternoon, whatever it happens to be on the weekend, and I'd love to have a drink in the sunshine or grab lunch. All of those options become kind of the same.
Yeah.
Right? It's all along the same line and the same experience, and so I'm happy that's being introduced there, and it'll create kind of a natural community where we're going to be able to work off of one another as
Absolutely.
well on the same footprint.
No, and I think it's awesome. It's really interesting to see, what new ideas are coming, and just the idea, talking to people and hearing optimism, because like I was talking about, I get into these rabbit holes of listening to freaking Instagram reels, and I'm like, the world's, dying, and it's just like when you get out into the real world and talk to real entrepreneurs that are doing things, it's there's still a ton of exciting things happening.
Eternal optimist.
Absolutely, man. You have to be. But thanks for taking the time. Thanks for sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Of course, Mark. Yeah, I'd love to.
And like Peter was saying, we had a great time last night. Just getting to share the stories, with local craft breweries. The people that were at Epic last night, I think we're having a really good time. So it's nice to see people in physical spaces enjoying themselves, and you give people a good platform for that.
Wonderful. I love that. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you both. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.